In 2022's The Power of the Doctor, fans were very surprised to see Jodie Whittaker regenerate into none other than David Tennant, the man who previously brought to life the 10th Doctor from 2005 to 2010 and 2013 counting Day of the Doctor. By the time the Centenary special aired, we knew that Tennant would be returning in some form for the 60th anniversary, alongside Catherine Tate as Donald Noble. However, what exactly would Season 1 look like if 14 was the Doctor to travel with Ruby Sunday instead of the 15th Doctor? In this video, I'm going to hopefully provide you with an answer.
The multiverse is a pathway to many possibilities that some might consider unnatural.
So the first question that arises is, how exactly would this work, given that the story from the 60th episodes to now is so reliant on the order that it's in and sets up most of what we get in Season 1? Well, I have actually managed to work out a way for the episodes to work where we can have 14 meet Ruby instead of 15, and still have a majority of the moments from the series thus far. Now, because we're switching Doctors in this scenario, it's obviously going to impact a lot of the stories in some way or another, but don't worry because I think I've got things worked out. Now, I know a lot of people are asking, why would you pair 14 and Ruby? Well, simply because after watching Season 1 and the 60th specials, I was quite curious to see what would have happened if 14 travelled with Ruby instead of his succeeding incarnation. Now, for this scenario, I want to make it clear that I'm not erasing 15 or Ncuti Gatwa from the timeline, because if anything, I loved his pairing with Ruby as well, so don't worry because he will be showing up a bit later on. So I'm going to start off with the two pieces of 14th Doctor media we actually got prior to the 60th. These were the comic story Defender of the Daleks and the Children in Need short Destination Skaro, and there's not really too much we need to change here as those stories are more disconnected from the rest of Season 1 and the 60th specials. With the Doctor having faced the Daleks once again, that brings us, at least in this What If, to our branching point which triggers this whole timeline. Instead of landing on Earth in November of 2023, the Doctor gets things a little wrong and lands on Earth, except this time it's Christmas Day, which brings us to the events of Church on Ruby Road, where 14 meets Ruby for the first time. Essentially, we're not really changing the plot too much as it's more disconnected and would help to introduce us in this version of events to 14. The Doctor would meet Ruby and the two of them would team up to take on the Goblin King, with that plot essentially going as it did, seeing as the events of this special play a role in the finale. So the end of the episode would end with Ruby entering the TARDIS, except in this scenario, 14 would still be using Jodie's console room for the time being. This would then bring us onto the further adventures we saw during Season 1. Space Babies I don't think would change massively, other than the obvious change of the Doctor being 14 instead of 15. The Devil's Called I think would be interesting, as we see the 14th Doctor and Ruby meet Maestro, who gets defeated in the same way we saw. Though in this version I don't think we'd have the ending musical number, or we could because David Tennant can sing if I remember rightly. That then brings us onto the events of Boom, which would then go as planned, because I can't see a lot changing with that story. And the same goes for 73 Yards, because that is more of a Ruby Sunday centric story. Dot and Bubble would also remain unchanged, except 14 would be there in place of 15, so Lindy and her friends would likely go with the Doctor and Ruby in that scenario. That would then bring us onto the events of Rogue, and again, this is an episode that I don't think would change too much, and I would quite like to see what a dynamic between David Tennant and Jonathan Groff would have looked like on screen. Though I did love the dynamic that Groff had with Ncuti Gatwa in the story. That then brings us, however, onto the events of the Season 1 finale. The Doctor and Ruby would return to Unit Tower, and this would be where the Doctor meets a majority of the newer unit crew for the first time, including Colonel Ibrahim, Shirley Bingham, and Rose Noble. Now, from Fourteenth's perspective in this timeline, he hasn't encountered Donna yet, so is very cautious when revealing key information about his travels and his past, and it is also worth noting that this is where 14 would reunite with Melanie Bush, basically their reunion from the Giggle, but a little earlier in this timeline. The investigation into Ruby's parentage as well as the mysterious person they keep seeing leads them to Susan Triad and Triad Technologies, and we would then get the reveal that Sutek has returned. The Doctor and Mel would escape with Ruby in tow, courtesy of the remembered TARDIS, leaving them stranded in the aftermath of the universe's decimation. It's here where we would see the Doctor take a darker turn as he tells Ruby about a lot of the pain he's endured on his travels, and we would see the Tales of the TARDIS episode, which is sort of centered around the Pyramids of Mars, except we've got David Tennant instead of Gatwa. Then we'd go through the events of Empire of Death as we see the Doctor and Ruby defeat Sutek and bring back everyone who died. Then we would see the conclusion to the story and the same way, except this time the ending would be very similar to that of Last of the Time Lords, where Ruby, after seeing Earth devastated, chooses to stay with her family, and with Ruby gone, the Doctor then sets out to discover the truth behind one mystery, and that being why he got his old face back. That then brings us in this timeline of events to the 60th anniversary specials. This would be where the Doctor encounters Donna again for the first time since the events of Series 4, and now meets Rose from her perspective for the first time. Simply put, I don't see a lot of events in this story changing outside of a mention or two about Ruby and how she's back with her family. Headed into Wild Blue Yonder, again, the story wouldn't massively change, simply because this episode takes place largely off-world and on the abandoned ship with the Doctor and Donna. Maybe outside of a mention of Ruby and the travels that 14 went on with her, I doubt this would change the events of the episode in a large enough way. That then brings us to the events of the Giggle, where the Doctor and Donna return to Earth and face off against the Toymaker. And again, I don't think this would change anything massively because Ruby wasn't present for any of these events and had not yet met the Doctor, at least in 2023. Before Christmas. However, one thing that I am going to change is the regeneration. In this timeline, the 14th Doctor got his old face back to help him rest and heal from all the intense trauma he suffered on his other adventures. In this timeline, however, I think that thanks to his travels with Ruby, the Doctor could have already healed from those travels. So in this timeline, the shot from the galvanic beam would have caused 14 to regenerate fully into 15, without the need for any bi-generations. 15 then plays one final game with the Toymaker, which goes the way it did, with the villain being banished from existence forever, not before making the threat that his allegiance will arrive, which doesn't really mean much to the Doctor because he's already encountered the Goblins, Maestro and Sutek. The Doctor then theorises that some of the Toymaker's legions could include the Goblins he fought on his first adventure with Ruby on Christmas Day. After having dinner with the nobles, the Doctor bids farewell to Donna and the others as he heads out to explore the universe, and from here we would very much move on to the events of Joy to the World and then Season 2. Whilst I would like to alter some of the events of this season, I don't think there's really anything to change, simply because Ruby didn't have as big a role as she did in Season 1. So Ruby would still return for Lucky Day as well as the events of the finale, which would still end as it did with the Doctor resetting reality and then regenerating into the next incarnation.